What's up, ladies and gentlemen of the internet? My name's Scyushi, and this is going to be a very critical review of the PSVR2. Frankly speaking, I've seen a lot of other content creators reporting on this, saying that it's the best VR on the market right now. You know, really great headset. It's got all the bells and whistles and everything, right? And so, honestly, it piqued my interest because I'm a VR enthusiast. I own like 3 or 4 VR headsets now and have slowly been adding to that library. I've played hundreds of VR games and I've played VR games for hundreds of hours. So I have a lot of experience under my belt with this kind of thing. And I can honestly say that I think those YouTubers are sponsored or they don't have much experience with VR, because I am very sorry to report that this PSVR2 is the worst VR experience I have ever had. Doesn't matter what the technology is, doesn't matter how much crap they pump into this thing. The controllers I have issues with as well, not nearly as many as we'll talk about in today's review, but let's get into the issues that I have with the headset. So at a glance, you know, this thing is great. You press the button at the back here to adjust the top so that it can latch onto your skull. You can tighten it a little bit with this bolt. There's a little button here on the top of the faceplate so that you can adjust the distance of it. There's also some fancy buttons down here that you can press at any time to flip the camera so that your VR vision instead goes to the outbound camera so that you can look around in your environment, see where you are, see where your controllers are, and so on and so forth, right? All of that stuff comes pretty standard with the Quest, and just VR headsets in general have gotten really good. And so with that, there is some big competition. So what does this do differently? Well, it has individual eye tracking, which the technology behind that is actually quite impressive. I didn't realize when I was playing games that what it does is it kind of tracks where your eye is looking, and it will render that location in higher quality than what is in your peripheral vision, which explains why the performance is actually really high when you're playing these games that otherwise have very high graphics, like Resident Evil Village or Gran Turismo 7. The way that it renders things is definitely impressive, but games themselves taking advantage of the fact that you can blink is not really more than just a gimmick. Speaking of gimmicks, the headset also has a vibration feature, which I don't know why it has that. Like, genuinely, it was one of the first things that I noticed and one of the first things that I turned off as soon as possible. Like, I will honestly be surprised if somebody leaves the vibration on after extended periods of play, because with a VR headset, it's already going to be something that is headache inducing and can cause motion sickness for a lot of people. So having it just shaking your skull, in my opinion, is not more immersive. I think that's just a really poor design decision to add that. Anyways, on top of all of that, the mesh that goes around your scalp is a leather. I don't know if this is just an issue because, you know, I don't have hair or anything like that, but generally speaking, I found that this makes your head a lot hotter than the cloth absorbing, you know, foam that we have in every other VR headset in the world, except for this for some dumb reason. And then on top of that, my biggest issue with the headset is how uncomfortable it is. So what happens is, I'll try and do this at a sideward angle so you can see. Basically, you can adjust where this is at the base of your skull or the back of your skull, whatever. You can adjust it a little bit, but for the most part, you have to have the eyes at a very distinct level in order to actually see what's going on in the VR headset without it being blurry, right? Now, the problem is that the top of the headset is pushing down on the front top of my skull, rather than the more optimal and more comfortable variant of other VR headsets, where other VR headsets are smart enough to have the support around your entire front and back of your skull and on the top. Whereas this is all the pressure is just in this front part of your forehead. Now, this could just be an issue with me because I have a big head, right? My wife tried this for a little bit and she didn't really have as much of a problem with it. But for me, that was the deal breaker that made this the most uncomfortable VR headset I have ever experienced. And I know I'm not alone, because I saw lots of people complaining online about it as well. Now, the thing is, I'm wearing this beanie, or toque if you're Canadian, because of the fact that that was the top suggestion people had to get over the comfortability issue. And I can happily report that, yeah, since I'm wearing the toque, I don't have that issue anymore. It's just when it's on the base of my skull, all that pressure building up on the front was just impossible to deal with. Now, herein lies still two problems. One, I'm doing this during the cold season. If I try to do this during the summer, no bueno. I'm just gonna be sweating like cats and dogs. There's no way in hell I'd be able to wear a toque while I'm wearing this headset, right? On top of that, for how expensive this is, people shouldn't have to find a solution for how uncomfortable it is. I've never had any issues with any other VR headset. Oh, and another small minor thing is that this is the headphones. So they actually plug into the back of the headset, so they're kind of like this. And it's just earbuds. Now, before we end up moving on to the controller, I do want to point something out and say that my criticisms towards the hardware are in no way reflective of my criticisms towards the games themselves. PSVR2 doesn't really have any games that are worth it, in my opinion. There's like maybe 4 or 5 actual like PSVR exclusives. Gran Turismo is insane. Resident Evil Village is insane. I don't even know what else we've got for PSVR 2, but my point is that any of the other games that you see people talking about, like Pavlov and all this other stuff, those are games that are just on VR in general. And I do think that it's nice that console gamers that are stuck with this thing have, you know, an avenue to experience these amazing VR games. So now let's talk about the controller. The controller is kind of an big bulky thing that doesn't really need half of the features that it has, but generally speaking, it is really a nice controller. The ergonomics, I'm not the biggest fan of. I find that this controller is a little bit heavier than some other VR controllers, which does become a problem after hours and hours of play. But they also have the PS5 vibration in this, which everyone calls like next gen vibration. I'm speaking from experience and saying that it's just controller vibration. It's not immersive. It's not a big deal. The one thing that I did appreciate about this was the resistance triggers from the PS5 are here. I barely felt it being utilized in the limited games that I did end up playing on PSVR 2, but it's cool that it's there. Otherwise, generally speaking, this is the same controller as a Quest controller. Like, there's not really much to it other than that. The only thing that I'll say is I really don't like this. You know, the whole circle thing that they're doing, and, you know, it looks really nice. It looks really sleek, but the ergonomics, the functionality of it is just terrible, because a lot of times what'll happen is you'll let the controller loose when you're like grabbing a drink or, you know, just taking a break or whatever. And when you have the VR headset strapped to your face, it can be really disorienting trying to figure out how the heck you actually get your hand back into the controller properly, just because of the way that these are designed. Eventually I got used to it, but with every other VR controller, I didn't have to get used to it. Oh, and another very common issue I kept running into was often when I would end up putting the controllers and headset down and then returning to the game that I was playing, usually one of the hands would end up just kind of disappearing. And the only way that I could end up resolving it would be restarting the PS5 completely. Personally, this feels more like a software issue, like something that they could patch, rather than it being an issue with the hardware itself though. So to summarize, it's definitely a huge step up for console gamers, but as far as me on a personal level with my own personal experiences with it, I can't recommend it, man. It's too overpriced considering how uncomfortable it is. And that's my main issue with it, is just it's so ungodly uncomfortable. Now, there are definitely going to be some of you out there that don't have this issue, and I would recommend that you should probably try it out for yourself, especially if you don't already own VR in general, because the price of the PSVR 2, technically speaking, it has better specs than the Valve Index and is cheaper, which, okay, cool. But why would I still prefer to use the Quest or the Index then? Because they're far more comfortable, and in my experience are a much superior experience, right? Like, I'm not talking about the tech, I'm talking about how it feels, and it just doesn't feel good. The thing is, for me, it was immediately a problem. Like, the second I put it on, I noticed how uncomfortable it was. It wasn't just something that slowly grew over time. Thankfully, I'm still within my refund window at Walmart, so I'm just going to return it. And I'd recommend that if you're unsure about it, buy it from Walmart if you can, and then just return it in 14 days if you don't like it.